Trust life fully. Alan Watts' blueprint for anything to succeed. Have you ever wondered why, no matter how hard we try, sometimes things just don't work out? Why plans fall apart, relationships unravel, and dreams seem to dissolve into thin air the moment we chase them too tightly? What if I told you that the very act of trying too hard, of controlling, of forcing, of grasping, is often the core reason we fail? That's not just poetic sentiment, it's a deeply rooted philosophical insight drawn from the teachings of Alan Watts, whose vision of life was nothing less than a blueprint for flowing with the universe rather than fighting it. This is about trusting life fully, not because it's easy, but because it's the only way anything ever truly succeeds. Alan Watts once said, "The more a thing tends to be permanent, the more it tends to be lifeless." Think about that. What we often call security or stability is actually just another word for stagnation. Life is not a machine, it's more like a river, constantly changing, evolving, moving. And yet, most of us are so busy trying to dam the river, to hold it still, to make it predictable, we treat life like a game of chess, strategizing every move, imagining that if we just plan well enough, we'll win. But Watts reminds us that life isn't a problem to be solved, it's a mystery to be lived. You don't dance to get to a particular spot on the floor, you dance to dance. You don't listen to music to get to the last note, you listen because the whole song is the point.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
So why do we keep trying to control life when its very essence is change? The answer is fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of loss, fear of pain. But what if that fear wasn't something to be conquered, but something to be understood? You see, fear is the mind's reaction to uncertainty. But what if uncertainty isn't the enemy? What if, as Watts believed, uncertainty is the very soil in which freedom grows? What if everything you've been taught about control, planning, and success is not only wrong, but is the very thing keeping you from experiencing the richness of life? We live in a culture that praises hustle, glorifies productivity, and worships the grind. But Watts flips that narrative on its head. He tells us that real power comes not from effort, but from surrender, not from pushing, but from letting go. This doesn't mean being passive or lazy. It doesn't mean giving up. It means aligning yourself so deeply with the flow of life that your actions emerge effortlessly, like music from an instrument or waves from the sea. When you trust life fully, your success is not something you chase. It becomes a natural consequence of your harmony with the present moment. Alan Watts often used the metaphor of surfing. You don't control the waves, you learn to ride them. Life, he says, is like that. The wave keeps coming, you can't stop it. But if you learn to balance, to feel, to trust, you can ride it with grace. You can even have fun. But try to rigidly control it and you'll wipe out. Every time. This metaphor isn't just poetic, it's practical. Because the truth is, the more you try to control outcomes, the more resistance you create. And resistance is suffering. The key is to move with life, not against it. Here's a question I want you to sit with. What have you been holding on to so tightly that it's actually slipping through your fingers? Maybe it's a relationship you're trying to manage, a career goal you're obsessing over, or an identity you're terrified to lose. What if the very act of clenching your fists is what's keeping you from receiving what's meant for you? What if letting go isn't giving up, but opening up. What invites us to imagine life as a vast, interconnected dance. Everything is moving, everything is interwoven, and the idea that you are a separate self navigating this world like a lone sailor is an illusion. You're not in the universe. You are the universe experiencing itself from a unique point of view. And once you see that, truly see it, you begin to relax, you begin to trust. Because you realize that life isn't happening to you, it's happening as you. Now imagine if you could live from that space. Imagine waking up each morning not with anxiety or dread, but with curiosity. Not asking, what do I need to do today to succeed, but what is life expressing through me today? That shift, though subtle, changes everything. It changes how you work, how you love, how you create. It turns life from a battlefield into a playground, and yet it's not easy. Trusting life fully requires incredible courage. It means giving up the illusion of control. It means walking into the unknown and saying yes. It means embracing failure, not as a sign of defeat, but as part of the dance. It means realizing that you don't have to fix everything, solve everything, or be everything. Because life, if you let it, will carry you. Before we continue, ask yourself this. When was the last time you truly let go? Not gave up, but surrendered. Can you even remember? Or have you been holding the reins so tightly that your hands have forgotten how to open? What follows next is not just more philosophy, it's the next piece of the blueprint. If this first part was about surrender and trust, the next is about action. How to live, move, and create from a place of deep alignment with life itself. We're going deeper, much deeper. The paradox of effort. Why doing less achieves more. We've been told since childhood that effort equals reward. That if we just work hard enough, push long enough, and grind through the pain, success will eventually show up at our door. But what if that entire paradigm is not only flawed, but fundamentally backwards? Alan Watts challenges us to see that the constant obsession with effort, with trying, with forcing outcomes, is precisely what keeps us stuck. And here's the paradox. Often, the more we try, the less we actually achieve. The more we strain, the more resistance we create. You can't force a flower to bloom by pulling on its petals. You can't make a wave rise by shouting at the ocean. And yet, that's exactly what we do with life. We try to bend it to our will, believing that effort itself is a virtue, even when it leads us nowhere. Watts reminds us that effort, when born from fear or control, becomes a barrier rather than a bridge. Think about the last time you were truly in the zone. When time disappeared, your actions flowed effortlessly and you felt fully alive. Did that moment come from trying harder or from letting go? True productivity, true creativity, true mastery, these don't come from the grind. They come from harmony, from alignment, from acting in sync with reality instead of fighting it. When you trust life fully, effort becomes something different. It's not struggle, it's dance. It's not force, it's rhythm. You begin to see that there's a deeper intelligence operating through you, and the more you relax into it, the more effective you actually become. Let's go deeper. Imagine you're swimming in a river. If you fight the current, you exhaust yourself. You might stay in place or worse, get pulled under. But if you align your body with the current, if you allow yourself to be carried even as you gently guide your movement, you not only conserve energy, You move faster, smoother, and with far less resistance. This isn't laziness, this is wisdom. This is the paradox of effort. The goal isn't to do nothing, it's to do the right thing at the right time in the right way. It's about precision, not pressure. Presence, not panic. And here's where it gets wild. Most of our effort is actually spent resisting what is. We fight reality. We argue with it. We say, this shouldn't be happening, or I should be further along, or I need to be someone else. That internal resistance creates friction, and friction burns. But what if, instead, we practiced radical acceptance? Not resignation, but deep, conscious acceptance of what is. From that space, action becomes clear, it becomes obvious. You don't need to overthink, you simply respond to life as it unfolds, like a musician improvising with a jazz band. You're not controlling the music, you're dancing with it. What's often drew from Eastern philosophy, particularly Taoism, to illustrate this point, the Tao, or the way, is not something you conquer, it's something you attune to. The Tao doesn't fight, it flows, and yet, by flowing, it shapes mountains, carves valleys, and nourishes life. The Tao teaches us that the softest things in the world, like water, can overcome the hardest. Why? Because they don't resist. They move around obstacles, they adapt, they persist without strain. That is the secret of sustainable power. That is the paradox of effort, and it applies to everything. Your relationships, your work, your art, your healing. So ask yourself, where are you forcing things in your life right now? Where are you mistaking pressure for progress? It could be that project you keep pushing even though your heart's no longer in it, or the relationship you're clinging to out of fear, not love. Or maybe it's the idea of who you think you should be, a vision so rigid that it's crushing the very life out of you. What if you paused? What if you stopped trying to control the outcome and simply listened? Not to your thoughts, but to life itself. Because life is always speaking, it's just that we're too loud in our own heads to hear it. Watts challenges the myth that you have to make it happen. He says, you are something that the whole universe is doing in the same way that a wave is something that the whole ocean is doing. You are not separate from the process, you are the process. So what happens when you stop pretending to be the puppeteer and realize you're part of the dance? You begin to trust, and in that trust your actions become cleaner, clearer, and infinitely more impactful. You stop wasting energy and start channeling it. You stop striving and start thriving. Now let's be clear, this isn't about passivity, it's about a new kind of effort. One that comes not from fear, but from love. Not from desperation, but from clarity. It's the kind of effort that feels like play, that feels like breathing, that feels like life moving through you, rather than you trying to move life. And, ironically, this is when things start to work. Opportunities open up. People respond differently, creativity surges. Because you're no longer fighting the current, you've become part of it. So here's the next question to sit with. What would your life look like if you stopped trying so hard? Not gave up, but let go. What if your greatest breakthroughs don't require more force, but more faith? We're about to dive even deeper, because if effort can be transformed into flow, then fear can be transformed into power. And that's what's coming next. Turning fear into fuel. How to transform anxiety into creative power. Fear, in its rawest form, is energy. It's not inherently negative or destructive. It's simply intense attention on the unknown. Alan Watts understood this deeply. He often said that fear is not to be conquered, but to be explored. Because what we call fear is often just life asking us to pay attention, to wake up, to lean in. The problem isn't fear itself, but our relationship to it. We flee from it, we avoid it, we build our entire lives around never having to feel it. Yet, ironically, the more we run from fear, the more powerful it becomes. It grows in the shadows of our mind, morphing into anxiety, self-doubt, paralysis. But when we turn toward it, when we stare directly into the eyes of what scares us most, something miraculous happens. It begins to transform. Watts reminds us that anxiety is what happens when we try to live in the future. It's the mind's attempt to control uncertainty by projecting all the ways things might go wrong. But life doesn't exist in the future. It exists here, now, in this breath, in this moment. Fear pulls us out of presence, but it can also be the doorway back in if we let it. That's the alchemy. You don't get rid of fear by pretending it's not there. You transform it by using it, by listening to its message, by allowing it to become your compass. Let's get real. Most of the time we experience fear not because we're in danger, but because we're on the edge of growth, the edge of change, the edge of becoming something more. And that's uncomfortable. Every time you step into the unknown, part of you panics. What if I fail? What if I'm not enough? What if I lose everything? But here's the deeper truth. If you're not feeling some fear, you're probably not growing. Fear is the friction that occurs when your current self rubs up against your future self. And the goal isn't to eliminate that friction, it's to move with it, to let it shape you. Watts believed that fear is not something to be fixed, it's something to be danced with. He compared it to the sound of a violin. Think about it. The tension of the strings is what creates the music. No tension, no sound. In the same way, fear creates the tension that gives life its depth, its intensity, its meaning. Without fear, there would be no courage. Without uncertainty, there would be no adventure. Life is divided into two parts. Uncertainty, there will be no adventure. Without vulnerability, there would be no connection. So instead of asking, how do I avoid fear? Maybe we should ask, how do I learn to play it like music? And here's where fear becomes fuel. When you stop resisting it, when you stop making it wrong, it becomes energy. It sharpens your focus. It awakens your senses. It pulls creativity out of you that you didn't know existed. The best art, the most powerful movements, the deepest transformations, they're all born from people who felt fear and moved anyway. Fear becomes fuel when you stop letting it be the wall and let it become the fire. Let me ask you something. What would you do if fear wasn't a problem? Not if it didn't exist, because it always will, but if you stopped seeing it as the enemy. What decisions would you make? What conversations would you have? What dreams would you finally stop delaying? Watts invites us to stop waiting for fear to disappear and instead begin living alongside it. Because comfort is not the point, aliveness is. And fear is often the price of that aliveness. There's a kind of fear that's not about danger, it's about expansion. And the more you avoid it, the more your life shrinks. But when you lean into it, your life expands. You begin to realize that fear is not the signal to stop, it's the invitation to begin. Begin the project, begin the relationship, begin the change. And when you do, you discover something extraordinary, that you are more capable, more resilient, more powerful than you ever imagined. So here's the final question for this part. What fear have you been avoiding that might actually be your next path? Not because it's easy, but because it's true. Not because it's safe, but because it's alive. In the final part, we're going to bring it all together. Surrender, flow, fear, and how they merge into one profound truth, that when you trust life fully, not only can you succeed, you begin to live. The final surrender, why trusting life is the ultimate success. What if everything you've been chasing, success, happiness, meaning, has been right under your nose the whole time, quietly waiting for you to stop running and start listening? What if the real game of life isn't about conquering or achieving, but about allowing, receiving, and participating? Alan Watts knew something that many people never discover, even after a lifetime of striving, that the moment you fully trust life, not conceptually, but viscerally in your bones, you begin to realize that success isn't something separate from you. It's not out there, it's already here. But you've been too busy looking ahead to notice. We've been conditioned to believe that life is a ladder and we must climb it. Each rung represents a new milestone, a new goal, a new achievement. But Watts flips that entire structure upside down. He saw life not as a ladder, but as a song. You don't listen to a song to get to the end. If that were the point, the best symphonies would be a single crashing note. No, we listen for the melody, the fluctuations, the rise and fall, the unexpected moments. Life too is music, and when you stop trying to reach the end, you start to hear it. You start to feel the rhythm of your own existence. And that's when it gets beautiful. The final surrender is not about giving up, it's about giving in, not to defeat, but to reality, to presence, to the unfolding intelligence of life itself. When you trust life fully, you stop needing to manipulate outcomes. You stop second-guessing every decision. You stop living in fear of getting it wrong. You begin to operate from a deeper knowing, one that doesn't come from logic or strategy, but from alignment. And in that space, everything begins to move. But here's the twist. Trusting life doesn't guarantee comfort. In fact, it often leads you into discomfort, because growth is rarely cozy. It strips away illusions, it breaks down identities, it reveals what's real and what's not. It asks you to stand naked in front of yourself and confront the parts you've been avoiding. But what you gain is priceless: authenticity, peace, freedom. You stop needing life to go your way, and instead you start dancing with the way it's going. And ironically, this is when things start to work, not because you forced them to, but because you stopped blocking them. What's often asked as listeners, what would you do if money were no object? But a deeper question might be, what would you do if fear were no object? If time were no object? If success were no longer measured by external markers, but by your inner sense of alignment? That's what trusting life fully means. It's not about abandoning responsibility. It's about shifting your center of gravity from fear to trust, from control to curiosity, from striving to surrender. And here's the ultimate insight. When you trust life, you begin to trust yourself. Not the self that's been conditioned by culture, fear, and comparison, but the deeper self, the one that's always been there, the self that knows when to act and when to wait, when to speak and when to stay silent, when to leap and when to rest. That self is not separate from life, it is life. And the moment you align with it, you become unstoppable, not because you're trying to be, but because you're finally in tune with the source. So maybe success isn't about what you accomplish, but how deeply you trust. Maybe the real measure of a life well lived isn't how high you climbed or how much you earned, but how fully you showed up, how deeply you showed up, how courageously you loved, how often you danced with what was rather than what you thought should be. Let me leave you with one final question. What would your life become if you trusted it completely? Not just when things are easy, but especially when they're not. What if every twist, every turn, every so-called failure was actually part of a perfect unfolding? Would you still fight it? Or would you finally start to trust? That's the blueprint, that's the secret, that's the path. Surrender, flow, trust life fully, and everything else follows.